good afternoon to all our attendees. Is my audio clear?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So I think we can officially start now. All right. So good afternoon to all our attendees. Before we officially start the presentation, please allow me to reiterate our few house rules. All participants are muted by default to provide clarity to the audio of the speakers. You may send your questions anytime during the webinar through the Q&A box located at the bottom of your Zoom screen. All questions will likewise be catered during the Q&A session after the presentation of all our speakers. Today, we will be joined with the following speakers. First, he is the Business Development Manager of Kittelson Carpo Consulting. He has over 10 years of experience in business development, project management, digital marketing, and advertising. And he has also a proven track record of setting new business channels to an organization with a limited budget and eventually helping them penetrate new markets. Before joining KNC, Kerim worked as a business development manager for a multinational digital company headquartered in Madrid, Spain. He mainly focused on managing content, increasing website traffic, and monitoring campaign performance for the company's target market in Southeast Asia. He also worked as an account manager for a global advertising agency handling the digital advertising campaigns of the agency's business partners to help them generate more revenue from campaign sales. Kerim obtained his undergraduate degree in visual communication design from Yeditepe University in Istanbul, Turkey. He also obtained his postgraduate degree in marketing management from Humber College in Ontario, Canada. Our second speaker is the legal counsel of Kittelson Carpo Consulting. She assists both local and foreign clients on regulatory compliance with the SEC. And prior to joining KNC, Archie was an associate of a law firm that specializes in corporate law and taxation, where she was assigned to M&A, special projects, and tax appeals. She advised clients on corporate and labor concerns and assisted corporations in preparing repertorial requirements to SEC. While completing her legal studies, Archie worked as an editor in an advertising firm which caters to large pharmaceutical companies. Archie has an undergraduate degree in literature and obtained her law degree from the University of San Carlos. She was admitted to the Philippine Bar in 2009. Right, so thank you so much for expressing your interest in today's webinar. Before we dig into today's in-depth discussion, allow me to introduce myself. My name is Alexis and I am the Digital Marketing and Communications Specialist of Kittelson Carpo Consulting. KNC is a one-stop shop business consulting firm catering to both local and foreign clients doing business in the Philippines. KNC is a subsidiary company of Incorp Global, a leading corporate solutions provider in Asia with regional offices in Singapore, Hong Kong, India, Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, and Vietnam. In providing quality services, KNC works with its affiliate firms such as AHC Certified Public Accountants for accounting and bookkeeping services. We also have KC Global Talent Solutions for recruitment and executive search, and Carpola and Associates for all the legal inquiries. With that, please welcome our first speaker, Mr. Kerim Can Kiziler.
Good afternoon, guys. As Alex mentioned, I'm the Business Development Manager of Kittelson Carpo, and hopefully you guys will enjoy our webinar session with my colleague Archie Lim. Before I start, I would like to offer my sincere condolences to the soldiers who has lost their lives in the recent plane crash in Sulu, and hoping fast recovery for the soldiers who got hurt in that unlucky incident. So I'll share my screen. You can see my screen, right?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So today I'm going to touch on why is the Philippines is a preferred country for foreign investors. This would be my view in the country living here for 10 years, my observations mainly. Major countries investing in the Philippines, major investor sectors, and opportunities for the potential investors here in the Philippines. So again, I'll quickly touch on what we do. As Kittelson and Carpo, we are part of InCorp Group, and we provide company formation, outsourced services like recruitment, immigration, product registration, payroll. So as companies focus on their core targets, we help them complete their necessary business flow. And the beauty of our business is that we can provide expansion to our clients in Southeast Asia region, and they would get the same quality in our regional offices. So why is Philippines a preferred country? I think low operating costs are advantage for potential investors because from North America, Europe, or even within the Southeast Asian region, Philippines can offer low operating costs. Population is dominated by young skilled labor, approximately around 769,000 students graduate from internationally recognized universities. So all the investors, companies have a good pool of young skilled labor, which will enable them to hire them with a lower wage than normal. High literacy among Filipinos. It's the third largest speaking country in the world. Like I've been living here in the Philippines for 10 years, and I can hardly speak the local language because everybody speaks here English well. And, as a tourist or as a businessman or an investor, you wouldn't really experience language barrier in this beautiful nation. I believe that it's the fastest growing economies in the Southeast Asia region because there's still a lot of room for growth. And if the companies are in the right place with the right targeting, they would grow their income easily here in the Philippines. Of course, tax intensive and other government issued exemptions. Again, in IT, communication, and engineering, we have highly skilled manpower from my previous organizations as well. I've worked with a lot of highly skilled and young colleagues in IT, especially. And lastly, I think rapid infrastructure growth. Currently, our government is organizing the Build program. And the beauty is that it doesn't only happen in our capital, Metro Manila. It's nationwide, and all the roads, bridges, airports are built. And eventually, investors will have more location for their businesses. And that will be a big plus for the nation. So for now, I would like to touch on the major investing countries in the Philippines that would cover last 2020 and the first quarter of 2021. So as you can see, United States took the first place with 728 million US dollars. And China was in the second place, and recently China became more dominant in the Philippines investments, and they have invested around 321 million US dollars last 2020. And United Kingdom was in the third place with 269 million US dollars. After that, Singapore, Japan, and other countries followed. For the first quarter of this year, Japan leaded the first place with 219 million US dollars. Cayman Islands was second with $22 million. And Korea was in the third place with $12 million. So I'm sure more investments will come in the second half of the year. For the major investor sectors, again, for the last 2020 and the first quarter of this year, as you can see, manufacturing is the most invested sector here in the Philippines, and around 730 million US dollars was invested by foreign investors. Transportation and storage took the same place with the same amount of investment. So they're basically near to each other. This is because, I mean, even before the pandemic, Filipinos had always had the habit of purchasing their goods online via e-commerce shops. And this really boosted the transportation and the storage sector here. And of course, with the pandemic, this really increased a lot. After that, you can see administrative and support service activities. Real estate was a bit low last 2020, but I'm sure it will speed up with the post-pandemic. Electricity, gas stream, air conditioning, and others followed. For the first quarter of this year, again, manufacturing took the first place now with 228 million US dollars. Information and communication was in the second place with 94 million US dollars, and you could see real estate in the third place. So since manufacturing is the most invested sector, I would like to show you the most value-added top 6 industry groups in manufacturing. This data was released last December 3, 2020. So you can see manufacturing of beverages has really high value-added rate, along with electronic components, other food products, other chemical products, parts and accessories of motor vehicles, and manufacturing of non-metallic mineral products. So as we can see, Philippines can now handle more complex manufacturing demand here. I would also want to talk about more the opportunities for potential investors. Mainly, these are the experiences that I have coordinating with the management team of international companies and other colleagues from overseas. They see Philippines as a strategic point for manufacturing and distribution around Southeast Asia. So companies can have strong manufacturing centers here and easily open to Southeast Asia. I think Philippines is a strategic point for this. Of course, Philippines is a really lucrative market, but sometimes supply chain might be challenged for bigger corporations. So it's advisable to build manufacturing centers here to grow their operations smoothly within the Philippines. One thing is also, there is an audience that is open to foreign brands, the growing rate of middle class, which has buying power. So I want to support this with the information that I was able to receive from Credit Suisse. So in wealth per adult, in June 2020, you could see a positive trend from the Philippines, Egypt, and Bangladesh. They did even well, better than China. So this shows that despite the fact of the pandemic, we were able to increase the the wealth of our adults here in the Philippines. I'm still thinking positive about, especially 2022. Now the government is targeting to vaccinate 70 million people. Hopefully we'll be able to achieve that goal. They are also easing on the lockdown rules. Each government unit is working on this. And recently the government has lowered the corporate tax levels. So this will be really good advantage for local and foreign investors here in the Philippines. This is all from my end. Now, I would like to give the floor to my colleague, Attorney Archie.
Now we will be moving forward to our next speaker. Let's all welcome Attorney Archie Lim.
Thank you, Kerim, and thank you, Alex. So let me just share my screen. I hope that's visible now.
Yes, that's visible, Attorney.
Yes.
Okay, great. So, well, while Kerim listed all the reasons already why you should invest in the Philippines or why you should start to form your company already, even through this pandemic, I would like to add to those list of reasons with my discussion. So starting a business during COVID-19, an investor's guide for company formation in the Philippines. So just an overview of what I'll be discussing. So the SEC, or the Securities and Exchange Commission, recently launched a new registration system called the eSPARC. So I'll be talking about that first. I'll discuss how this relates to ease of doing business in the Philippines, its advantages and limitations, and I'll go ahead and talk about requirements to set up a domestic corporation. And lastly, also some additional reasons why you should start your business or start investing in the Philippines, my investment outlook to cap the discussion. Okay, so to start with the discussion, just an overview or an introduction really of the Securities and Exchange Commission. So the SEC, for short, is the national regulatory agency that supervises the corporate sector, the capital market participants, securities investment instruments market, and the protection of the investing public. So in short, it is the registrar and overseer of the Philippine corporate sector. So what did the SEC launch recently? It's called the eSPARC system. So it is the electronic simplified processing of application for registration of companies. So we wanted to point this out because this was just recently launched by the SEC this year. So it's an online facility that caters to the applications for registration of one-person corporations and domestic corporations. So the system allows the online submission of applications for review of the SEC. So how does this relate to the World Bank Ease of Doing Business ranking? So in 2019, the Philippines ranked 124th out of 190 countries. But in 2020, we saw a huge leap in that ranking from 124 to 95th out of 190. So because of initiatives like the eSPARC and other government initiatives aimed at streamlining government processes, so we expect, and the government agrees, in fact, the Director General of the Philippine Anti-Red Tape Authority expects improvement in our forthcoming 2021 EODB ranking because of these streamlined government processes. So one of those is the eSPARC. So what's so great about the eSPARC? So since we've started using it last April when it was launched, we've spotted 4 advantages to this new system. So the first advantage is really the company name verification. So Just to give a little bit of background, the SEC is still hard at work in trying to face or address pandemic-related challenges. So the first system they launched last year was the interim registration system. So this is the old system that the eSPARC aims to replace. So before, you had to wait for several weeks before you would get feedback from the SEC whether you could use the company name. But if you now in the eSPARC system, if you enter the proposed company name there, in a matter of seconds, the system will notify you whether you can use that company name or not. The second advantage is the submission or the ability to submit supporting documents in the system. So again, compared to the old system and the old way of applying for registration with the SEC, you would have to submit supporting documents manually, or you had to submit it via email. So you had to make or do a separate process for you to submit those documents for the SEC's review. Now, the eSPARC system has integrated that into their system basically. So all you have to do is just look at one platform, only a single platform, which is the eSPARC, to do this. The third advantage is that there is a faster feedback from SEC. So with the advent of the eSPARC, we've noticed that the SEC has a shorter feedback loop. So previously, when you would submit your application under the old system, and even before that old system, before the pandemic, you would wait for weeks before the SEC would approve your application. Now, after you submit your application to the SEC, you would get feedback in as quickly as 3 days. So sometimes the feedback would be, or it would be a little late, but it's never going to be later than a week. So it's a far cry and a huge improvement from the old system. And the last advantage that we have experienced is the ability to revise applications for registration. So if, again, as a background, before, when the SEC would give you feedback on things that you need to change in your application, or if there is a phrase or a word that they want to add to your, let's say, articles of incorporation, you would then have to apply for a new registration from scratch, because basically it has to be a new application following the instructions of the SEC. But with the eSPARC, your application is going to be saved in the database in the system, so that when the SEC gives you feedback that you need to change something, you need to tweak something in your registration papers, all you need to do is just go back to your application and revise it according to the instructions of the SEC. So those are so far the 4 advantages of the eSPARC. Now, of course, this was just launched last year. Oh, sorry, this year, just a few months ago. So of course there will be some limitations, but thankfully the limitations are far outweighed by the advantages. Earlier we mentioned 4. So far there are only 2 limitations that we've noticed with this eSPARC. So the first one is that it's just limited for now to domestic corporations and one-person corporations. So this is, I said for now because the SEC has actually notified or signified that later on, the eSPARC will be able to accept applications for other types of corporate vehicles, such as foreign corporations, like a branch office or a representative office. And lastly, the last limitation that we noticed is that although earlier we mentioned that the eSPARC system immediately notifies you of whether you can use your company name in a matter of seconds, this is always going to be subject to the power of the SEC to manually review the corporate name, because the corporate names which are confusingly similar or non-distinguishable from those existing company names should not be allowed. So they will just, basically the SEC always has this power to ask you to tweak your corporate name a little bit. Of course, they won't outrightly reject your application. You just need to revise it. So actually, those are just the two eSPARC limitations that we've noticed. But overall, the eSPARC should be a huge boon in the registration process overall. So just to give you an idea of how this platform looks like. So I've placed some screenshots here. So this is one of the first, actually the first page in the application in the eSPARC. There are several steps to it actually, but this is the first one. So you can notice here that there is a part where you will enter your company name. So also in the same page, it's going to generate a sort of a notification telling you whether you can use that name or not. So a subject, of course, to the SEC's power to manually review the corporate name. So that's it for the eSPARC. So I want to go ahead and discuss how to set up, or the requirements to set up a domestic corporation. So of course, there are several types of corporate vehicles in the Philippines, but we wanted to discuss a domestic corporation during this webinar because it's simply the most common type of corporate vehicle, and it's also the most flexible in terms of the business activities it can engage in. So just a quick review of, or for the information of those who are not yet familiar with the corporate landscape in the Philippines. So a domestic corporation is a stock corporation. It's a stock company. So the stockholders enjoy limited liability. The stockholders may be individuals or juridical entities. It's governed by a board of directors, and it has a separate legal personality from its stockholders. So also a recap to fairly recent update on our laws. So you can form a company not already with just 2 stockholders and 2 directors, because previously it was their minimum was 5. So you can now do it just for 2 stockholders and 2 directors. So what are the documentary requirements? Let's say if you were a foreign investor. So of course, you're going to need your articles of incorporation and bylaws, which govern, or basically your incorporation documents that you will submit to the SEC. You will also need to look for a principal place of business or an office address, because this address will already be indicated in your application papers. You will also need a Philippine tax identification number. Both juridical entities who are investors or individuals will need to obtain the TIN. And lastly, generally, there is no minimum capital requirement, except domestic market enterprises and special industries where the law mandates a minimum amount of capital. So earlier I mentioned that even through this pandemic, even through the lockdown restriction, it's still possible for you to set up a company, even if you're not physically in the Philippines. So the way to do this is just to submit documents which are either consularized or apostilled, depending on which country you are located and where you have signed those documents, basically. And you send those authenticated documents to the Philippines for submission to the government agencies. And if you were a local investor, the requirements are virtually the same. You'll still need the articles and the bylaws, a principal place of business or office address, your Philippine tax identification number. Of course, most of us here will have a TIN. And again, lastly, there is no minimum capital requirement, except special industries where the law mandates a minimum amount of capital. So this still holds true. Even if it's going to be a Filipino-owned company, there are still special industries where the law will require a minimum amount of capital. And lastly, as a local investor, of course, you won't need to apostille or consularize. Notarization of such documents already suffices. So not to get too technical about the requirements, because ideally it's really your consulting firm who will handle these documents for you, and you will just ideally will just be guided on what are the requirements. So you can still focus on your core business. So just to cap my discussion and to add to the list of reasons why you should invest in the Philippines, I also have some investment outlooks here. So the first one is that the government has recently allowed 100% or full operations of the BPO sector. So this is worthy to note because we all know and we've experienced how crippling extensive lockdowns can be. to businesses in general and to the economy as a whole. So, and also it's worthy to note because as I noticed earlier in Kerim's discussion, that the administrative support industry is also still one of the strongest industries that foreigners will invest in the Philippines. Second is that we have in the Philippines a much improved telecommunications sector. So the government has fast-tracked the construction of telco infrastructure in the Philippines. Earlier, it was mentioned that there is a build program of the current administration, and part of that is the fast tracking of telco infrastructure. And this is very important because right now, I am working from home. This pandemic has taught us the value and really the necessity of working from home. So it's important we have a good Wi-Fi, basically. So because of this initiative, previously the Philippines was at 103 in the world in the global ranking for broadband speeds. But now we are at 65th. So the survey was done by Ookla, a speed test company. And lastly, one good reason why you should start investing, setting up your business is the lowering of the corporate income tax. So we were notorious in the region for having the highest corporate income tax rate at 30%. But thankfully, businesses are relieved at the CREATE Act, or the Corporate Recovery and Tax Incentives for Enterprises Act. So it has lowered the corporate income tax to 20% for domestic corporations with net taxable income of 5 million pesos or less and have total assets of 100 million or below. So for foreign corporations, it's also lower at 25%. And lastly, in the Philippines, you can get excited about a law, but the next question will always be where are the implementing rules to operationalize these the provisions, and in particular for the CREATE Act incentives in that law. And just very recently, the implementing rules to the CREATE Act have been issued. So that should finish my discussion. I just wanted to keep it short and sweet. I didn't want it to get too technical because if ever you have any questions, if this webinar has made you more curious about setting up a business, you can send us your comments or questions below in the Q&A box, or you can send me an email at archie@kittlesonandcarpo.com, or you can also visit our website and drop a message there. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you so much, Attorney Archie, and of course to Kerim. We are now opening the floor for our question and answer portion. So we encourage everyone to drop your questions in the Q&A box below your Zoom screen. But to start the question and answer portion, I'll be starting first because I received a private message from one of our attendees. So I think this question will be directed to Kerim. The question is that, what are the most common difficulties that are hardest to overcome when entering the Philippine market through greenfield investment?
I see. I mean, of course, with greenfield investments, you will have to the investors will have to put more capital in their operations. But the idea is to have full control of the business. So I think it makes sense. But what I would advise the companies who are willing to do that is to have an extensive market study on the sector that they want to invest and see if they would be capable to have success here, because there are a lot of factors in the Philippines for lower market class. It's a really sensitive market, price sensitive market. Like when I came to the Philippines for 10 years ago, I was amazed to see like little sachets of toothpaste, soaps. So like the lower middle class or D class is heavily depending on the price. And visibility is also important out there. You have to create good marketing strategies to become successful. So my advice for investors is to do market research and then see how they can invest in the Philippines. There will be the disadvantages will be, of course, competition, more capital investment requirement. But eventually, if they do the right thing in marketing and analyzing the market, they would be really successful here in the Philippines.
Thank you so much, Kerim. Another question that we have in the chat is that I think this goes to Attorney Archie. So can foreign ownership go beyond 40%? We often get this question a lot.
Mm-hmm. Yes, so I also get that question a lot from my potential clients. So in a word, really, yes, it can. So generally, companies or businesses can be 100% foreign owned. It's just that there are exceptions when it comes to special industries where these nationalized or partly nationalized industries. So it's just like with another very common question about the capital. Generally, there is really no minimum capital. But there are special industries which there are special laws that fix the capital, and also that the same thing goes for nationality restrictions, depends on the industry.
Okay, I think if they have more questions regarding foreign ownership and the industries involved, they can just send an email to Attorney Archie and we'll definitely reply as soon as possible.
Yes.
Yeah, so to our audiences, please feel free to send your questions and we'll definitely read it as well. I think we have another one in the Q&A box. How long is the usual time frame to set up a business in the Philippines? I received another message with the same line asking, can you give us the shortest timeline possible in incorporating business in the Philippines, given the red tape and other business processes?
Mm-hmm. That's a really good question. And also a common, very important consideration when you're setting up a business. So our usual timeline during this pandemic is 3 to 4 months. With a domestic corporation, like I mentioned earlier, I discussed that we wanted to focus the discussion on the domestic corporation. Not only is it the most flexible types, it's on the common type. It's also the quickest one to set up. So you can set it up as fast as 3 months. Or just to set expectations, we say 3 to 4 months.
Okay. So this one is answered. Oh, sorry. I think there's another question. This asks, what do you think will be the future of business in the Philippines this 2021, given the pandemic and other restrictions and visas for the foreigners to come into the country? I think this goes to Kerim.
Hopefully, I mean, of course, this can't go like this. And I feel like there will be more improvements on the lockdown rules next year with more vaccination numbers. But of course, e-commerce sector will start to boom more and more. Actually, DTI has reported last year a lot of new companies that registered their businesses in e-commerce. So e-commerce will be more common in any sector, but eventually I think we will have to push for the post-pandemic levels as well.
Right. Another private message we have is that how much is the smallest capital needed to start a business in the Philippines? I think this one's for Attorney Archie.
Mm-mm. Yes. So as discussed earlier, so there's no legal minimum required as capital, when you want to set up your company. But, for practicality purposes, when, for example, the client really wants to know maybe just give us a ballpark figure, I think an amount of 50,000 to 100,000 pesos should suffice, especially that you are going to be using this capital for your expenses, your office space, you're paying your employees. So that should be a good starting point already.
So as mentioned by Attorney Archie, I think it will still depend, but of course it matters if you also ask our consultants more about it. So our next question is, e-commerce is booming in the Philippines. What requirements should we secure first? I think this refers to the legal requirements they need to secure for e-commerce businesses.
Okay, so for e-commerce, it's really just the same for with the rest of the types of industries. So there's not much difference really. Even the invoicing, I think, requirements are the same. So whatever that is needed with all types of businesses will also apply to an e-commerce business. But I think maybe one thing to note is e-commerce may venture into retail, the retail industry. So this is I think this is a nationalized industry, so that such that if there is any foreign ownership, the capital requirement will increase to 2.5 million USD. So I think that's quite a high number. A lot of my clients would agree, but there is interest, very high interest in the government right now in lowering those capital requirements, specifically for retail and other types of industries, for it to be more welcome to foreign investment.
Okay. Another question we have from Marie is that, is setting up a business outside Manila, example, provincial metro cities, easier, or there isn't much difference in the processing?
So generally, there shouldn't be much difference in the processing. So one of the first steps really is registering with the SEC. So you can do that within Metro Manila. But for the local registrations, they still follow the local government code. So it should generally be the same. It probably will differ with respect to the forms that you will submit, because it may vary with respect to, or with the different local government units.
Another one we have is that for confirmation, there is no minimum amount of capital now to incorporate domestic corporation and one-man corporation. The old rule of 25% of authorized capital must be subscribed, and the 25% of the subscribed capital must be paid no longer applies. Thank you.
Yes, that's right.
Okay. Do we have any more questions from our participants? I think they no longer have any question at the moment. But if in case after this webinar you still have further inquiries and other clarifications, please feel free to send us an email. I think Attorney Archie and Kerim can type their email addresses once again in the chat box for you to take note of.
Sure.
Okay.
We have another question from Adrian. The question is that, can we get more information about one-man person corporation?
Mm-hmm. Sure. So a one-person corporation, you can think about it as completely the same as a domestic corporation, in a sense that you still enjoy limited liability. The personality of the one-person corporation, or OPC, is separate from the shareholder, the sole shareholder. So it's a huge advantage if you compare it to just a sole proprietorship, where your personal assets can be held to pay for your liabilities. So it's much the same as a domestic corporation, which I discussed earlier. It's just that you only have one stockholder. So I guess the only difference is you will have to appoint a nominee and an alternate nominee. So these two persons, they're not part of the board. They're basically just in standby, basically, in case the sole shareholder rather becomes incapacitated to act as the shareholder. So that's basically the only difference that I see between the domestic corporation and one-person corporation.
Another question is that what type of corporation is the easiest and most ideal you can suggest?
Yes, so it's the domestic corporation. So this is why we chose to discuss it. It's easy in a sense that the timeline is the quickest for the domestic corporation setup. That includes also the one person corporation, since they're the same, and you can also play around with the equity structure of a domestic corporation. So actually, this is also another difference between OPC and a domestic, because in a domestic corporation, you can increase, let's say, the ownership of one person, and this person is, let's say, a Filipino, and you want to enter in this particular industry that requires 60% Filipino ownership. So you can, have that Filipino shareholder own 60%, and let's say the 40% is held by a foreign national, but later on you are now able to, let's say, you are able to comply with the capital requirements when you, let's say, this industry, for example, retail. So you want now to have foreign equity in your company. So if you chose a domestic corporation, you can amend the ownership or increase the ownership of foreigners, because now you're able to comply with the other requirement, just the capital requirement. So it's flexible in that sense. So you can only do this with a domestic corporation. If it was a one-person corporation, then the nationality of that company, of the OPC, will naturally take on or be stemming from the nationality of the sole stockholder. So yeah, that's it.
Thank you so much, Attorney Archie, for expounding on that details. As mentioned before, it just gets technical as soon as we discuss differences of businesses. And once again, it depends on the industry. So it matters if you also send us an email at archie or arcci@kittlesoncarpo.com or kerim@kittlesoncarpo.com. You may also visit our website at www.kittlesoncarpo.com.ph. So we now cater to our Q&A portion. So thank you very much once again, everyone, for joining us in today's webinar. Once again, I'm Alexis, and see you on our next webinar.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.